Hi, podcast listeners. My name is Madison Hopkins, and this is Modern Ways. Modern Ways is a guide to eco-friendly homes. And on this podcast, I combine sustainability and real estate for people who want to change their home environment. In each episode, my guests and I empower you with fundamental knowledge so you can create your eco-friendly home and thus change the world around you. Thanks for tuning in today. I really appreciate you being here and hope you learned something new. So, let's hop on in to the modern ways of eco-friendly homes. Hi, podcast listeners. On this episode, our guest is Neal Collins. Neal has his master's in sustainable development and spent the early part of his career working internationally in Eastern Europe with the Peace Corps and in South Asia on climate change adaptation and threatened species conservation with the IUCN. He currently resides in Portland, Oregon, where he and his partner, Alyssa, run a sustainably focused real estate sales and development company that works throughout the Pacific Northwest. You can check out more of his work through a new podcast he launched earlier this year in 2020 called the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast, where his mission is to revitalize the world together. Thank you so much for being here, Neal, and coming on the show.
Madison, it is a pleasure. It is great to connect with other like-minded people, and I love what you're doing.
Thanks. I love what you're doing as well, and I absolutely agree. Connecting with like-minded people is kind of what it's all about. It's how we get the work done. It's how we make sure people know what's happening and making sure that we are connecting with those like-minded people. I would love to start with you telling us why you launched your podcast and how you chose the word regenerative to describe the built environment.
Yeah, that's a great question. We had actually been thinking about a podcast for a long time, and I really want to back up because it really takes the backstory to see how that we've evolved into the word regenerative, because I think a lot of the times people, they think sustainability, and I even have a master's degree with the word sustainability in it. And that word is really getting kicked around a lot. And so it really started whenever I came out of my undergraduate program. I was very curious about the world, and I wanted to get out and I wanted to see more. And I ended up in Eastern Europe, as you had mentioned in my introduction, in a very small country called Moldova, very agrarian. And so it was very low income. But what was so startling is that we're coming from a place in the West where we think that we're a very rich nation, but the fabric of social life in those smaller countries that really didn't have many resources, they had these massive abundant gardens, and they had a plot of land outside of their villages that they could go, and I could really see how they might not have much money, but they had a lot of resiliency. And I wasn't calling it resiliency at the time. It just seemed like we were always going out and we were picking fresh fruits and vegetables, and they were canning, and we would go in somebody's basement and they would just have an overflowing amount of food. And that's something very different whenever you come back to the United States, where we're quite food insecure. And so I started to think, okay, what does that look like? I'm thinking about resiliency, I'm thinking about sustainability. And we ended up going down the route of getting a graduate school degree in sustainable development. And we learned a lot about poverty alleviation and different technologies. And I think a lot of people right now, whenever you talk about sustainability in real estate, they're thinking solar panels on roofs. Mm-hmm. And they're thinking about energy efficiency, and they're thinking about building science. And I love that. I think that's an amazing approach, and we need that. But I've always come at my work from a community development and a community building lens. My work in the Maldives was taking hard biological sciences and translating that into everyday language that, first of all, the village people and the people that live there could understand and they could adopt. And second, how do we take that and how do we turn it into policy speak? And they're not thinking, oh, how do we create sustainable change? They're thinking, how do we connect with our neighbors and form these relationships so that we can have a thriving community? And how can we ensure that our kids can go to good schools? And how do we have clean water and make sure that we have food to eat? And so whenever I jumped into real estate, it seemed like an abrupt shift, and it really was, but I was very interested in how we organize ourselves in space and uh, how do we use the leverage of real estate and the power of real estate for positive change. And what I learned is that it's not necessarily the science behind the buildings and the solar panels and the efficiency. It's truly, how do we use our space and our land so that we can regenerate ourselves and become more resilient? And that really looks like, yes, we do need to bring in building science, but we really need to bring in other things, and such as how do we connect ourselves with space? How do we meet more neighbors? How do we create homes that are sanctuaries instead of financial pits? Because we started to work with a lot of tenants and a lot of landlords and a lot of people that were in very bad economic situations on our real estate sales side, because a lot of motivated sellers were coming out of the woodworks because of the 2008 Great Recession. So we really get to see this really interesting side of what real estate can do, and it really emboldened me to say, you know what, we do need more placemaking. We do need more efforts to create healthy and vibrant homes.
I love that. So one question I have for you is the Living Building Challenge. You told me about that, so I know you're familiar with it. They have the petals, which to me sound like principles, and there's 7 of them: place, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, equity, and beauty. And if I had to guess, I would say that your favorite would be the place petal, which basically articulates that how to protect and restore a place once it's been developed, how to encourage the creation of communities that are once again based on the pedestrian rather than the automobile. That's a quote from them. So it's a little bit specific towards pedestrians and automobile, but essentially you just said create communities, and that's the most important part about this whole regenerative movement.
I love what the Living Building Challenge represents. It's a very rigorous criteria to get your building passed, and they've now since launched the Living Community Challenge. And that's really taking a community-wide long-term standpoint of like, how do we have regenerative and thriving communities? And resilience and sustainability is a big portion of that. And so, yeah, I do love that, because I have a team of what we call change agents and placemakers. And we help people buy and sell real estate, because we find that there's a lot of power that we can have whenever we're catching people at the right moment in time, whenever they're thinking about buying a property and know, hey, we have these kinds of values. Like maybe we do want to put on solar panels on the roof, or maybe we want to insulate our properties and we want a property where we can grow a garden. And we can catch them at a point in time where we can give them access to the resources that they're looking for, including financing, which is a huge deal, because I know a lot of people that want this kind of technology, but they don't have the resources to do it 3 years down the road after they've already bought the property. And so what I started to realize is that I ripped out all the grass in my yard with my wife, and we created an amazing garden, and we were really using a lot of permaculture principles. And through that, I was really worried because I was seeing just all these wood chips, and it looked like a big pile of just brown ugliness. And I live in the Pacific Northwest, where it's very gray outside. But what I started to see is that more people would come by and they would talk to us. And they'd say, God, what are you doing here? And these are people that they're my neighbors, and I try to be as friendly as possible. And I would never have the ability to go see them. They kind of came to us. We started to act as a magnet. And as the garden grew, more and more people started to come out of the woodworks. And so I can't walk down my street now without seeing a lot of people that I know, and they know who I am. And then we started to bring in, my wife made a flower altar, and little girls down the street, they come bring petals, and they make wishes for what they want. To bring in public art of, hey, let's leave some chalk on the sidewalk and see what that happens. And encourage those social interactions. And what we started to see is that, yes, our house is on the corner, And then our neighbors across the street, beautiful lawn, very meticulously landscaped. They ripped up a huge section of grass and planted a vegetable garden. And they came over and they asked us how to do it. And we gave them some compost and some plants and things like that. And then another neighbor down the street, they started to do the same thing. And so what I realized is that this is all about placemaking. This is how we can create systemic and positive change. And it is from tiny little placemaking activities. And so Living Building Challenge might be above and beyond most people's financial resources. But if you dissect those little petals, oh my God, there's gem every single one of them.
I love that. I love the placemaking. And I know you've also said you work for person by person to person change, community by community, and that's sort of your model. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing with your house, and that's your model for going forth with your real estate team as well. That you're catching buyers and sellers and saying, hey, like, this is possible. Did you know this? Are you interested in this? We have resources for you. And that's essentially what I'm working on doing as well, is having those resources, because I do see a lot of value in making small changes. Like you said, putting chalk out, making a flower altar. Those are amazing things. That's so beautiful to hear. And I absolutely love that it's tangible for people. It's not overwhelming.
It's not. And I think it has to come from a ground up movement. And if we're talking about real estate professionals, unfortunately, the reason why there's such a stigma around even the word realtor is that people are tired of being sold to. And so we went down that path. We built a brokerage with 20 agents in it. I built a property management company that managed over 200 homes in the immediate area that we're in. And our agents always were coming to us and saying, how do I get another deal? And so our metrics for our company was very much financially driven of like, okay, how do we do more transactional volume? So you're always looking out there, who's ready to buy, who's ready to sell, and you're not actually providing a lot of value. I don't think that the real estate agent profession has much longevity to it, because if that's what we spend 98% of our time doing, instead of thinking, hey, where can I actually provide valuable insights, and what are the activities that I can go meet other really like-minded people that are interested in the things that I like to do, that I'm going to be doing no matter if I'm working or not, like in this current pandemic situation that we're in. I've met more people in the last 2 months because I'm home and I'm rooted and I'm in the garden and I'm talking with neighbors and check in, see how they're doing. And that's how you can really make a difference in your business. And it doesn't really matter what business you're in. We just happen to be buying and selling real estate. And because there's a builder in me, I actually want to physically change the landscape of our communities. And it's not, I want to go out. I've worked on hundreds of millions of dollars worth of projects, like big towers, underground parking, changing 17 city blocks to do big development projects. And it's not my calling. Like, that's somebody's calling. It's Wall Street's calling. But my calling is really saying, hey, you know what? There's someone out there, they need to move. We're going to take their house and we're going to repurpose it into something healthier, because once you start peeling back the onion of how our built environments are actually making us sicker, isolated, and poorer, then you start to realize, oh my God, if I can go project by project, house by house, and person by person, I can actually stand by my work and say, you know what, I'm not going out and chasing business. People are coming to me, and I'm focusing on the one area that I know that I can do the most good with.
I love that. So I want to ask you real quick, is that what you're referring to as the pocket neighborhoods? Let me clarify my that. Is having houses facing inwards, we talked about this once before, instead of having them road-centric, be community-centric. And is that the pocket neighborhood that you're referring to? Or is your pocket neighborhood something that you've a pocket, like your neighbor down the road, you did a garden, now your neighbor's doing a garden, and now another neighborhood does the garden. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'll take it back to the origins too. So I was introduced to pocket neighborhoods through a couple very forward-thinking real estate developers in the Portland market. And then I said, where are they getting their influences? And I was given a book called Pocket Neighborhoods, Living or Small Scale Living in a Large Scale World, written by a philosopher, an architect, and friend of ours now named Ross Chapin. He was a very dear soul, and he started to really conceptualize, why are we orienting our houses towards a road whenever what that does is it activates the cars in the street and it validates them. And if we want to be living in a world where we don't have to use transportation like that as much because it's very inefficient, it's polluting, it's toxic, and it costs a lot of money. I mean, just think it costs roughly about $10,000 a year to own a car. And so he started to really scratch the surface on that and said, look, what if we oriented our houses inwards on a common green space? And because he is another community-led designer, he's creating the science behind how do you have social interaction. And so with his developments, he likes smaller format houses because we don't need these huge 10,000 square foot houses. We need something a little bit smaller and what he calls just right. It doesn't have to be so small like the tiny house movement. I love it. It's beautiful. Personally, I can't live in 98 square feet, but I can live in 1,200 square feet.
Yeah.
And so what he did is he said, look, let's build a little bit smaller. We're going to orient it towards a common green, and we can have elements of public garden or playground equipment for the kids. And let's put front porches back onto houses so that we can create semi-public and semi-private spaces so that when you're walking from your car, you've got to go through the neighborhood that's much smaller, a pocket sized, and let's have interactions with people. And so these are kinds of developments that we're fortunate that we've blazed the zoning code on, that we can build these kinds of communities. But a pocket neighborhood can really be, it doesn't have to be physically next to each other. It can be, hey, we're going to rally around our neighborhood and we're going to create more placemaking activities. And one of the best things that I ever saw was on an alley not too far away from here, whenever the pandemic first hit, and 4 or 5 houses, I didn't know these people, we were on a bike ride, but 4 or 5 different families put their tables out in front and they're having dinner. And
Like a real kitchen table or like a
it's
full?
like a pop-up table that they're all seated around there having dinner, and they all cook their own food and they're all about 15 feet away. But it was such a great way to show, like, hey, you don't have to build a new development to have the elements of a pocket neighborhood. And it all, like, you don't have kids, I don't believe, but we had a kid 3.5 years ago, and that's whenever so much changed for us, because we live in a very urban, dense neighborhood. We're close to downtown Portland. I love my neighbors. I love where I live. But what I absolutely loathe, and this is insane of where we've gotten to as a culture, is that my son would go outside and he'd be on the sidewalk and I could see him from our dining room window, and he'd be playing, drawing with chalk on the sidewalk, and people would stop their car, get out, come to the front door and say, hey, do you know that your child's outside? And I said, yeah, I know. I see him right there. And now, whenever you have so many people do that, and I live on relatively quiet streets, it means that everybody's so tense. They're worried. What if the kid walks into the middle of the road? What if he gets hit by a car? What if a stranger picks him up? And so we're living in this very paralyzed, fear-based society. And I hate it. I want my kid to be free range. I want him to have the childhood that I think we even missed out on it. I was born in the mid 80s, and we missed out on it to a large degree then. And so I don't want the fabric of our communities to look like that anymore. I really want to have the built environment nourish us, and kids can run free.
I first off love I love that you said I want a free range child. because this is like the best. It's like the epitome of our society. Like, we want free range children, you know? And I was born in the mid 90s. So my family is from Louisiana. You're also from Louisiana. Go Southerners. And so my mom grew up in the country. My grandma grew up super country, you know, like just that's just how it was. When my mom was probably your son's age, she was a little tornado. She's always been a spitfire her whole life, and she escaped out of the house and was running naked down the street at 2 years old. And a neighbor picks her up and brings her back, and he's like, "Hey, Elizabeth, here's your daughter. Brought her back for you, your free range child, you know." But yeah, when I was growing up, they let us take the golf cart. We ran around the whole neighborhood on that thing. We just roamed everywhere, four-wheelers, golf carts. So I felt like I had a pretty free range childhood experience, and it's definitely something that is worthwhile. Yeah.
It's why we really need to take into account what is the zoning of our cities. And we're very much, every single person and even non-real estate people, they're participating in what kind of communities they want to live in. Because as much as I want free range kids, I want the ability for us to be able to walk to a grocery store or walk to public transportation, or even can we bring our work centers closer to home? And technologically, I think that's going to be happening. The pandemic has really sped up some of these uh, events that were happening already, and it's really okay. How do we live in that kind of a society? Because that's whenever sustainability really does come into play. It's because what we're talking about with free range children is really we're isolating ourselves, but we're isolating ourselves in a car-based society, in houses that are quite toxic and they use a lot of fossil fuels. And so if you want to make change, then it's, yes, there's that social permaculture aspect to it, but there's also, we need to drastically shift the way that we are working and the way that we're recreating and the way that we are consuming. And that means we've got to have more opportunities to keep things a little bit more local, and get out of the car, use light rail or a bus or Uber or something like that, or God forbid, I know all the car folks out there are going to get really riled up, but get on your bike. You know, simple as that, like the most amazing technology ever that doesn't require any fuel except for the food that you're already going to be eating. Like, try it out. It's going to be great. You're going to get some exercise. So that's what I mean is we're really like, I don't want to call it sustainable. I want to call it regenerative, because my God, I feel so much better whenever I live in that kind of a society. So for me, and I'm realizing this as I'm saying it right now, is like what I'm doing is I'm essentially just saying, what do I want? What does my wife want? What do we want for how to raise a child, and how do we want to interact with the people in our community, and we're building it. And it feels so much better than just like, where's the next deal going to come from? How do I make this amount of money? Like, the money is a byproduct of the impact that we can have.
So can you tell us a little bit about the work that y'all are doing, building regenerative homes, resilient homes? So you said you're buying and selling, and you're now investing in real estate, right?
Yeah, so whenever we moved to Portland, we came at a really good time where the market was creeping up out of the recession, and we started to buy these small multifamily properties. And for our background, coming from a conservation and the nonprofit environment, we are thinking about those things of energy conservation, and like, how do you have a little bit more airtight buildings, and how do you have efficient furnaces? But it was still very much in this mindset of like, hey, we need to put in gas ranges because natural gas is cleaner. And we are following a playbook that's been put out there by every single investor and things like that. And so over the years, what we realize is that, that's only a small part of the equation. There's much more that you can do. And I think across the country, we've got an affordability issue these days. So what we're doing is we can still bring in uh, kind of a normal, like, hey, if we're going to go buy a house, then we can do these things on our programming list that anybody's going to need to do to fix up a house. Like we need to do paint and flooring and new appliances and things like that. But we've really started to key into like, hey, how do we do that in a non-toxic material kind of way?
Mhm.
And so we've really had to deep dive into what makes financial sense and what doesn't make financial sense, because financial sustainability is also a huge component to this. Like if I could make these projects pencil by doing living building challenge projects, I would, but oftentimes we just don't have that luxury. And so uh, it's looking at low VOCs on paint and what are the sustainable building materials that hold up a little bit more over time, like marmoleum or bamboo. How do we actually insulate properties? Like a lot of people think that we can just like cut a hole in the wall and blow in a bunch of insulation, but it's actually going to rot the house, and all that insulation is going to compress down at the bottom, and it's really going to rot your house out. And you're going to start living with mold, and then mold's going to make us sicker. And then one of these really big breakthroughs for me is I get upper respiratory infections every winter. I didn't have that living in the tropics. Um, and and what I've really realized is that it's the wood burning fireplace that I have that everybody loves. Like all our buyers, they want to go buy a house with a wood burning fireplace, and look killer. And I love mine. It creates hygge and coziness and all that. But I've now realized, like, wait a second, this is where my upper respiratory infections are coming from me burning wood, my neighbors burning wood, because all those particulates are staying in our home. So
Oh,
can we convert to catalytic wood burning converter fireplaces, or can we put in electric fireplaces and put the panels on top? So there's all these little things about the house. Like we even hired an environmental wellness consultant to come test our house for the EMFs, the electromagnetic fields from our routers and things like that. Like if you don't sleep well, and the chances are, like if you ask somebody on the street, hey, how do you sleep? 8 out of 10 people are going to be like, I don't sleep that great. It's like, hey, where is your phone whenever you are sleeping? Is it next to your bed? Well, you've got a 5G signal with really fast waves going straight through your body that's waking you up. The same with your Bluetooth, the same with your Wi-Fi router. Like we're getting invaded with things that we're not even realizing are affecting our immune system and our physiology. And so we're thinking about these things into our developments. And when it comes to really on the affordability side, like I'm a big proponent of eco density. Like I think that we should have smaller housing options, maybe like keep a big house in the front yard, but let's put an accessory dwelling unit that I really like to call a garden suite in the backyard. We've got really progressive zoning that allows for that. Uh, Hopefully, I think it's where you are in Denver, and it's kind of sweeping across the country. But if we can do that, then all of a sudden, like we've created the ability for our parents to live out back. Like I'm getting to that point where my parents, they want to buy a house where I'm at so that they can be close. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, why would you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars whenever I can just build a little place in the backyard for you? Or because not everybody can afford starter homes in our cities now, starting at $425,000. Like that's a lot of monthly income to support that payment, that debt service that they've got. So by putting in these ADUs into our developments and selling it either as a house with an ADU so you can earn extra income, or even what I love is some developers out there that they'll condominiumize and they will sell off the ADU and the house separately, because now all of a sudden you've got a $400,000 house, but you've got a $175,000 ADU. And I love that. And that's what we're incorporating amongst like what creates the cost in projects. Well, it's financing, it's permitting, it's labor, and it's materials. Something's got to give if prices, if we want a little bit more affordable housing. And I really am driven towards market rate housing, because I've gone through the brain damage of of applying for grants and trying to do public-private partnerships. And like developers just don't have the time for that. They don't want to induce the brain damage. So I see a lot of our work in the future really shifting towards looking at the difference between stick-built and panelized and modular construction. And I'm really excited to be working with some architects out of the UK actually that are doing more net zero modular designs that we're bringing to the West Coast.
Nice, very nice. I think part of it is also, so like when you say, the house for the parents in the backyard, like my parents would die at the idea of that. They're just like, oh, no, thank you. I do not want to live in a shipping container, the granny flat. I saw someone post the other day, it was a shipping container, said great granny flat, and I laughed so hard I had to tell my grandmother about it, and she just cracked up. I would never. So I think part of it is also making the concept of, I'm going to use the word sustainable, but I'll say resilient home, regenerative home, something more green dense home. Also sexy, like make it appealing to people. People, I think, want options, but they don't want to give up their luxuries. And I think we have the ability to where you don't have to, like, it doesn't have to be like this concept of just like a brick in the backyard. Like, here's your backyard home. Like, that doesn't sound good. But if you say, here's your little downsized luxury home, connected in this family unit, you can have
Yeah,
whatever you want.
it's a cultural issue, and I don't think that our parents are very much on the same side of they're very aligned in their thinking, and I don't think that history is going to be very kind to that. That right now, what is the option for the majority of the population is baby boomers. They are aging. They need to be downsizing. They can't stay in their homes. Okay. Well, if they want to downsize, they're getting to a point now they can't buy a smaller house in the same neighborhood where their kids are, where they want to age in place. Like that, it's no longer financially affordable. And then God forbid that they need to go into a nursing home, it's going to cost them $10,000 a month. So all of a sudden, finances become such a hypercritical thing. And I think over the long term, this is getting very philosophical, but we spend 40 years of our life trying to squirrel away money so that we can retire and hopefully live well for 15 years, 20 years, if that. But it creates a lot of trauma in our lives. And I don't think that we're going to have the luxury to be like, hey, I don't want to go live in somebody's backyard. Like, wait a second. Vancouver, BC, what's going on right now is there's these big houses and they've got a big backyard, but they're $2 million houses, $3 million houses. And so what we're seeing, and this is an increasing phenomenon, is that a small ADU granny flat is getting built in the backyard. Maybe the kids that they bought the condo downtown, they've got the dog, they've got the corporate job, they realize like, yeah, this doesn't really fit with our lifestyle now that a kid's coming into the picture. So maybe they're going to live in the granny flat, or maybe the parents are going to live out back and the kids live in the front. And I think those are killer solutions, because I can tell you my in-laws live in Alaska, my parents live in Louisiana, and I'm in Portland. And sometimes I am drowning with trying to raise a kid without community. And that really sucks. And I don't want to lead people with that option. Like, if I'm going to make an impact on the planet, I'm going to at least give people the ability to live closer in community.
I totally agree. I have not lived with my family for about 9 years now. I went to boarding school and high school, so about 9 years, maybe 10. But yeah, I'm kind of getting to the point where I really miss them a lot, especially being out here in Colorado, and I really do want that community. So I am starting to think like, okay, well, is this where I'm going to live forever? Because that is important to me, and I do hope to have children one day, and I want them around. I want to live where my brother lives, like he's a cool dude. He's funny. Let's get my brother in the mix. So yeah, I'm totally starting to think along those same lines that it seems like you're putting a lot of action towards. Neal, we are closing in on our time frame, so I have 2 more questions for you.
Okay, I'll go quick.
Okay. Oh, they're quick answers, probably. Do you have any role models?
I have a ton of role models. It's really hard to answer because I've got role models that have been dead for centuries,
Mm.
living mentors, and and I get a lot of inspiration out of talks like this, where you know we need to stand on the shoulders of giants that have come before us. And so there's people out there that, like, there's a book called The One Straw Revolution. This is about regenerative agriculture, but I've drawn more from that for my work in real estate than I've drawn from almost anything else. And so yeah, I what I did with the regenerative real estate podcast is that, you know what, I want to go have these conversations with the people that I'm either really admiring their work, or I think that I've read their book and they've just blown me away, and I'm drawing so much inspiration from them. And so even if nobody listens to the podcast that I'm producing, that's okay, because I'm having these conversations for myself and I'm getting so much out of it. And I'm really excited about the journey that you're taking with this podcast, because those are my mentors and those are the heroes out there. So yeah, I've got a lot of different mentors that I look upon.
I love that. I heard this parable. I think it actually comes from the Bible, but I read it in a book, and it was saying you look over your one shoulder and you have people who you admire. I don't know if you could hear me, but you look over your one shoulder and you have people who you admire, and then you look over the other shoulder and you have people who you can help. Um, so I think that's really interesting because I listen to your podcast and now you're on my podcast. So definitely some shoulder looking happening.
Yeah, no, I think it's vital, and that's really how, looking over time, that's how people have made it. Like, once you start climbing, or I don't even call it climbing the ladder because it's got such of a, you're thinking corporate ladder, but once you start hiking up the mountain, you've got to turn around and you've got to say, hey, let me lend a hand to somebody that's coming up after me, because you did not get to that point without going up. I actually heard some, if you are successful in your 20s, then you really need to thank the parents and the mentors and the guardians of whoever was raising you whenever you in your teens and younger than that. Uh, and then it's really in your 30s and your 40s that you really become tested. And I think that's really whenever I started to key into, like, hey, I need to reach out to these people, because if they're gone and we don't have the ability to tap into that collective wisdom, like, we're not getting the wisdom transfer that we used to be getting. And people aren't reading books, they're stuck on YouTube and they're stuck on Netflix. And so go out, find mentors, read books, and get inspiration from a lot of different places.
Yeah. And last question, where can people find you?
You can actually find us on Instagram. I love Instagram because it really fits with what we're talking about. You've got to meet people with where they're at. If you want change, you actually have to go to the mediums where they are. So it's why I might be on YouTube one day. That seems to be a big undertaking, but latitude.realty on Instagram is our handle. I am Neal Collins on Instagram. You can go to the Regenerative Real Estate podcast. You can type that in, find us. Our company is called Latitude. We're at chooselatitude.com. All those different ways, they all filter into me somehow. Uh, there might be some inspiration that you're going to see along the way, but yeah, go check out our pages, and if anybody wants to connect, we'd love to have a digital coffee right now.
Thank you so much, Neal. I really loved our talk today, and that is actually how I found you, was a hashtag on Instagram, and then I found your Latitude, and then I listened to your podcast. So you're doing good.
Awesome. Thank you, Madison. This is a pleasure to come on the show.
Yeah, well, all right. Thank you so much, and I will talk to you another time then.
Okay, take care.
Explorers of Modern Ways, thank you so much for tuning in today. You can find more of me on Instagram at Moving with Madison and YouTube, Moving with Madison. YouTube is where I post the video recording of each episode, so you can watch along if you please. I hope you learned something new today, and that helps you take a tangible step towards creating your eco-friendly home.